Hey, everybody, what is going on? This is so interesting. You are catching the very first conversation where what I called it is what did I call it? Something radio. Okay. Let's just start there. This is what it is. We are testing out this new platform and we're excited to bring you a conversation around boundaries. And you hear me saying, we're who's the other part of the we. Dr. Michelle Fynan is joining me. We always have a good time. We found each other on Clubhouse and we've partnered ever since. So, Michelle, when I say boundaries and when we started talking about this, what was the first thing that came up for you?
Mm, well, we had a conversation where it was like, hey, you know, what do you think about doing a talk on boundaries? And I was like, just in reflecting on the discussions I had had that day alone with people that I work with in the relationship and intimacy coaching that I do, I was like, we we talk about a lot of stuff, but at the root of it is often a boundary concern where either boundaries are too rigid and it's blocking the love that we want in like a self-sabotage type of way, or maybe they're so flexible that we get into these backbend positions that are completely unsustainable, and then we're upset at other people for making us, quote unquote, making us feel that way when you know it's a choice. And I think that if we can have a conversation on boundaries where we just talk about what that looks like and how these decisions we make about boundaries can really help us and hinder us, I think it's important to know and to start reflecting on that.
Oh man, yeah, you hit a lot of stuff there. I like the talking about being too rigid and then being so flexible. Like I actually had a an image pop up where I'm like
Yeah.
doing I can't do it because I'm surely not flexible enough, but
Yeah.
a gymnast like just flexing around things and yeah, there's like a good balance I think in any situation when it comes to boundaries. But you asked a great question in our thread where you said what are boundaries, and I think, I mean, that's the best place to start. And when I was thinking about that, I was honestly thinking, oh man, I think our I was thinking our school system is so messed up and what what we get taught, like, because I
Mm.
don't ever think I've had actual conversations around what are boundaries. And so you asking me that challenged me to think of, okay, if I'm defining what they are, what are they? And for me,
Mm.
what came up was I think they're visible and invisible rules that we have for our lives. But some of the, the invisible ones we don't even know are there. I think we have boundaries that we've seen in our lives
Hmm.
that we just incorporated because they were modeled, and we've never even verbalized that that's actually happening. That's what came up for me as I thought about that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the modeling that you just said, that's as we're children, we learn by experiencing modeling, so we see what's going on, so it's not as much like what you say to kids, it's like what you do. Our actions are speaking louder than words. So with boundaries, we may experience with our parents that maybe they've got really good boundaries and they allow you to have things like privacy, or maybe there's you're encouraged to have your own voice or whatever it is, make your own choices. Independence is encouraged. Whereas at other times, without even making it an aware thing, that parents sometimes might not be aware that they're doing it, but
Hmm.
there can be a level of dependency that is actually encouraged. Um, and I think we find this especially in the disability community that we're both a part of, where dependency is it's something that happens, and independence is often not encouraged. So that's probably a whole other discussion, my friend.
Oh yeah, like I just want to jump on that for a second because I think that is powerful. That just you saying that made me think of how many people that I've had come to me and I've heard in conversation talk about their idea of independence and how, oh man, it's so ingrained in a like this is what independence looks like. And like you can be independent and not be able to drive.
Yes.
You can be independent and still live with your parents.
Yes.
And so I love that because that does set up a conversation around boundaries. So if I live with my parents, and so I'll just say, look, I'm 35, and hey, guess what? I live with my mom, and hey,
Mm-hmm.
I'm cool with it. But there are very clear boundaries in
Yeah.
place because we're both adults.
Uh, yes. We're both adults. And that I think is so important, because when we don't feel like we can show up as the adult self, then there's doubt. There's trusting other people and what they say about us instead of having that internal knowing,
Ooh.
you know? And self-worth is tied into that. There's a lot of different layers to that specific onion, you know? And so just to kind of circle back with what I see when I hear the word boundary, and I'm just a visual person. You know, you and I talk a lot in metaphor too, which I love because I think that visual can be really helpful. You know, you can live at with your parents as an adult and still have great boundaries, which is what you're saying. And I see like the house, let's just say. So having good boundaries would be like this bird's eye view of the house, and you're able to see like this is your room, this is your space, this is my space, and this is where we meet together. But there's walls, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and but there's also doors where you can invite people in, you can close the door, you can open the door. There's a lot of choice that you're making. Now, sometimes you're in, you know, a backyard that doesn't have a fence. So, but you still know what's your property and what's your neighbor's property, right?
Yeah.
So the walls don't necessarily have to be like a visible thing, but there can still be an understanding there.
Oh man, I I love all of what you just said, and I really like the door, like the ideas of doors open and closed, because I think an important part of boundaries is once you understand what yours are,
Mm-hmm.
um, is being able to communicate those. And what I was thinking about is sometimes when you're living in um, with other people, even if you have the door closed, they can still come kick the door open, um, unexpected, and like those boundaries can be can be crossed. So it just made me think of how important communicating the
Mm-hmm.
boundaries that you have are. But that comes first with the awareness of, hey, what are even my boundaries?
Yeah, and I think that's a really great takeaway for anyone who's listening, is to just take that opportunity, recognize we really don't talk about this. You know, we're not taught it in school. Our parents maybe never specifically said, these are what boundaries are, and we're teaching you that today. But in some form or fashion, we were modeled this, and we have taken away um, either boundaries that are helping us or boundaries that are hindering us. So we can all take a moment and say, how are my boundaries? What are my boundaries? How do I see them in my interactions with other people? What is helping? And what do I want to shift? What do I want to address and
Mm.
improve? And what would I get out of doing that?
So I want to take a minute right there and just say, hit the pause button, rewind back so you can hear that again, write down those questions, and go back and actually reflect on those for yourself. Because we can all do the exercise and they're all going to be independent and different and unique to us.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So, another thing that it's been coming up for me as I've thought about this conversation, and it's the idea of trust and safety.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in a conversation. I think this was during um, the conversation was around boundaries, and it was about you get to have respect yourself enough to
Mm.
enforce your
Yeah.
boundaries and to trust yourself that like I'll just use this as an example of us talking. Like, if I cross your boundary, to have the respect to say, hey Nathan, that really crossed a boundary for me, and to be able to communicate it to me that that happened, and
Mm.
know that, okay, this showed up, and now I know kind of where my line is.
And now I'm going to say everybody needs to pause and rewind and go back to where Nathan just said, hey, Nathan, you've crossed my boundary. What did that feel like? Even just imagining yourself saying that to someone else, because that would be a great indicator as to how comfortable you are with voicing your concerns about yourself and your needs. And when we think that talk having good clear boundaries are going to push someone away or make somebody else feel bad, or it's going to make them leave, or whatever it is, there's a lot of different motivators that we have for keeping our boundaries so flexible that we're just letting anybody do what they want. You know, we have to identify that and like feel into. And I say feel into instead of think. Like, what did you feel? Like, oh, if I were to say that, like, what would happen?
Nathan may never talk to me again.
And then what would that say about me that I'm.
I'm a bad person because I enforced an internal standard for myself.
Right. Right. And I think you also said it helps us get clear on what our boundaries are. Maybe you didn't know that that was a thing. And it's
Yeah.
like, now that I'm aware that this is a thing, let me think about that. But is there a way to say that you're not comfortable without, shutting down maybe?
So, what do you think when it comes to safety and boundaries? What do you think happens if I don't have any boundaries? And what does that say about, for you, um, me creating a sense of safety if I don't have any?
So you're saying if you, or like speaking for myself, if I don't have boundaries, what is
Yeah.
that? How does that make me feel in regards to safety?
Yeah.
So when we're looking at boundaries, we're kind of looking at this continuum of, on one end, let's just say I have no boundaries. I'm more like a leaf being blown wherever the wind is taking me. I could feel very out of control. I could feel not safe because I'm not grounded. I quite literally don't have anything supporting me. And I don't trust my ability to land where I want to land because the wind, that's up to the wind. It's not up to me.
Ooh.
Then on the other side of that, you could be, you know, such a rigid like boundary that you're a fortress. You're not letting anyone in at all, you
Yeah.
know? And it's you're not being blown with the wind here, there, and everywhere, but the doors are like welded shut here. You're not letting relationship happening or happen. So it's two different feelings. And then in the middle, like what might that look like is you can feel safe. You can have the doors, you can have the house, you can feel safe in your room and know that the door is like something that you could lock for safety. It's something you can unlock and let the people in that you feel comfortable with. You can put a sign on the door communicating who's allowed in. You could have a bouncer, I don't know. We're just running with this. But again, it's like the difference between having this open field where there's no walls and you're just flying around the fortress, and then in the middle where there's a house and you're a grounded house.
Yeah, man, it's so interesting. First, you made me think of Little Rascals and the He-Man Woman Hater Club when you
Yeah.
said you can put signs on the door, no girls allowed. And we can see from that movie that those boundaries even change when you go back and watch the movie.
Yes.
So I love that. And I think my experiences as humans, like I think something that's often never stated is we the more direction we have in our lives, the more we feel um, safe to be ourselves. And I think
Mm,
boundaries gives us a sense of direction.
yeah.
And I,
I gotta hop on that
okay,
because you said, boundaries give us that safety. Now, for some people, they're thinking, but the fortress is the safest of all of these options, you know, because it's like on lockdown. It's not letting anybody in. And you built it that way because of experiences.
mm-hmm,
So what we find though is that sometimes we're building that fortress for safety, and then that stressor is no longer present, but we're still stuck in the fortress. So we're still responding to a safety matter that's no longer a concern.
yeah,
But and that comes from not addressing the root of the problem, which was the trauma, the experience, the negative thing that happened. It's much like people who go through a traumatic thing but then take it out on all of the next relationships that they have because they're fearful that it's going to happen again. And it makes sense that we would be fearful. We're we're protective of ourselves. We want to survive all of these traumas, but we also have to recognize that without processing through that, we're also blocking out joy. So we're blocking out the fearful thing, but we're blocking out the great stuff too.
yeah. It's almost like we built the fortress, but we we burnt the blueprint along the way, so we don't remember how to get out.
Yeah, yeah.
Man, that's so interesting. And it's so one of the things that I like being the son of a football coach and being around sports is the idea of sports. And so when I talk about boundaries, I use sports a lot because they have integrated boundaries. Like there's an out of bounds put in place, and they have set rules that they use. But when I'm talking to somebody, I'm like, well, you might be playing badminton and
Mm,
I'm over here playing football. And so we're communicating two very different things, expecting each other to understand without actually communicating. Hey, no, Michelle, I'm over here playing football. That's not what we do. And
right.
you're like, oh, well, I'm over here playing badminton or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love
Um,
that.
and we just go along and we're like, why is this not why am I not able to communicate this where they understand? Well, did we actually question what their rules look like too,
Hmm.
and the game that they're playing, so that we have a better understanding of what's happening?
Hmm.
Because I think it's always our responsibility to have the question and be curious about the other person, because we know what's going on inside us, but I can't know what's going on inside you without asking you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we can often get lost in the guessing game of assuming what's going on in another person's head and also assigning narrative of what we believe is going on. And you said I know what's going on inside of me, but I would even say that not everyone does.
Mm,
And I think that happens when we are raised in a way that has weak boundaries, because then we are taught to even trust what someone else says about us even more than what we're feeling. Like, oh, well, if they're saying that that's how I am, they must be true. And how many times have people spoken lies over other people that they then believe, right? Like, oh, well,
yeah.
no one's ever going to love you. No one's ever going to want to be in a relationship with you. And it might not have even been a direct thing that has been said. Maybe it's just what is modeled by society or what is said by people indirectly, but we believe these lies more than we believe that inner truth of like, I'm pretty awesome, you know? So that's where I think coaching can come in, because we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
You know?
And we can't see outside of ourselves.
Right.
And having an outside perspective is like crucial. One of the best things I ever got taught was the idea of thanks for the feedback,
Yes.
and like decide what that feedback means for you. And I think you get to approach boundaries like that too. Like you're always um, having conversations and being in relationship with different people. And so I think your boundaries are like you can have universal ones, but I also think that they're independent based on your relationship with particular people because
Hmm.
of your experience with them and where you are on the trust factor and how safe you feel with those individuals. And so it's about looking at feedback and saying, hey, thanks for showing me that. Now I get to question, do I believe this to be true? Or if you have 20 people showing up and showing you the same thing, telling you the same thing, maybe it's time to be like, that's showing up a lot.
Yes.
What
Could
do
I
I
be
do with that?
wrong? Yeah. could there be another possibility? And I I think that we often touch on that. Like, is it possible that some other truth could either be true at the same time, or could a different perspective be more helpful? Um, but I love what you said about feeling safe with other people, because we do want to make sure that when we are taking feedback, that we go to people that we trust their opinions. And often those people, there's a reason why we feel safe with them, and more often than not it's because they are modeling good boundaries to us, and they have that inner confidence because of potentially their good boundaries. So I would even encourage everyone to reflect on, because we reflected on, what are my boundaries, what, like, how do I know where maybe I need to do a little tune up of my boundaries? But one way of looking at that is to also look at who in my life has good boundaries. And you might say no one. That's a possibility, because there's a lot of like generational factors that go into where you can have your whole family just not have great boundaries. So then we're looking at friends, or then we're looking outside of our circle of friends, you know,
Yeah.
because like attracts like. And sometimes you're in a group of people that doesn't mean that there's someone there that you can really look at. So start looking for what you want so that it can then be modeled to you of how to get there.
Yeah, and it's like the same applies with you're the average of the five people, right? So if you have four friends that aren't great with boundaries, guess what? You're gonna be the fifth one because that's what's modeled for you. That's not to say that it just is what it is, right? And there was a great story I heard one time about there was a like a granddaughter. She was making something for Thanksgiving and she was following the recipe and she just cut off this huge chunk of the meat that she was cooking. And then she had the question of, why am I doing this? And so she's like, hey, let me go find out. So she called her mom and her mom's like, I don't know.
That's
why
just how it was done.
Yeah, it's how we do things. And so when they finally got down to it, they kept calling down the line and they got to the last person and they're like, it's because when you were little, we had a oven that only fit this much of the meat. So we had to cut this off because it wouldn't fit.
Wow. And we keep these stories going, even though they only served us in this one oven.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
And but the power in that too is it only takes one question and one point of being curious
Mm-hmm.
to find out what that root is.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. That's so
So
good.
have the courage to ask the hard and challenging questions.
Absolutely. The courage to shift, I mean, really, like generations and generations moving forward. So this work, it feels like a lot because it is, but it's just as hard to sit there with the struggle that's currently going on because of, not addressing what what you're experiencing too.
Yeah, 100%. So if I'm somebody I've been listening to this conversation and I'm like, I know that I have work to do on my boundaries. And I've reflected on some of the questions that I've heard here. What's one step that you see that I can start to implement today, even if it's a tiny step to um, get clear on my boundaries?
Well, I love what you said, where it was like, pause this, go back. And essentially, what you're telling everyone is like, let's take action, because we can get into that stage of feeling like we're making progress because we are consuming this information, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I know all about boundaries now. That's really interesting. Okay, great. But the real magic happens when we do the work. So
Yeah.
that pause and that self-reflection is so important. I would even venture to say that reflecting then a second time and being witnessed by someone else and
Mm.
feeling that safety in talking about it so that you could have another perspective too, and just allowing this thing to evolve. I just got out of a session and we talked about how, so often we have stuff stuffed into a room, like going back to that room analogy. We turn out the lights, we close the door and we lock it. We don't want to address it. It's too much. We don't even want to tell other people like that we have this room in the house.
Yeah.
And, maybe every once in a while we open the door, but the lights off. And when the lights off, I mean, in your head, you're remembering what you put in there and it's intense. It's scary. But if we go in, even with someone else, and flip the light on, you can see what you're really dealing with. And it's not most of the time as bad as we think, especially if we've got someone else there to like process through with us. But we're able to say like, do you see that as a monster? And they're like, oh yeah, that's a monster, we got to get out of here. Or they're like, I know what that is, it's actually just a shadow, let's move this over here and go with our, and you're going with a guide who maybe has already done this themselves. Ultra helpful. But I don't know. So I think it starts with reflecting, doing a bit of this on your own, being witnessed and going about it with a team, getting support when it gets to be too much.
Mm. Mm. Man, okay, that gives me another question. So the team aspect, what what characteristics are important for you, um, for somebody who's on your team? Like if they were the person that was going into the room with you and they had the flashlight,
Yeah.
what does that person look like to you?
Well, I think our natural inclination might be to grab a friend, maybe someone that you're in a relationship with, someone nearby, But I'm just thinking about my own challenge right now of like working out. Okay. So if I want though to like make progress in working out, I'm going to go find a personal trainer who knows about the body, like who knows about what I want to do. Not someone
Yeah.
who's like, I know about your body and I'm going to tell you what to do, but someone who can guide me in making safe decisions here. That person might not be my friend. They might be they might be one of the reasons why I'm in this current scenario because we're grabbing donuts all the time. You know what I mean? So I have to be real with myself and get real about who is going to best support me and who's going to be able to spot the weight that I want to lift, you know?
Ooh, ooh,
Because that's
yeah.
not going to be just anybody that I want. It's going to be a specific person. And it's important for us to seek out the right person to do the heavy lifting?
Oh man, yeah, that's powerful. And yeah, the I think the gym analogy right there is crucial because yeah, if you get the wrong person spotting you, I've seen what happens there, and I've seen what happens when you have no person spotting you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I'll never forget watching, like, I watched the ambulance come and pick a dude up because he popped a pec muscle and nobody was there to even
Ah.
spot the weight. And whoo boy.
And that's the equivalent of us saying, I can do this on myself. by
Yeah.
myself. I'm strong. And we are strong, but sometimes the biggest strength is recognizing when you need support and that you can't do it all on your own if you're going to get anywhere, you know?
Yeah.
And man, that's like we do try to do it on our own when we don't want to open that door and get real about what's in there, either out of shame or whatever else we've built it up to be.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, oof. So, I mean, that's a consequence. That's a
Yeah.
consequence.
Yeah. So, oh, yeah. So I think that's the reflecting is important. And then the asking yourself, who's the person that I need in my corner to help me with? Because I know that you listening there, you know what your number one boundary. Like if you could only implement one boundary, you know what one would make the biggest difference for you, and you can go find a person that exemplifies what that successfully looks like and ask them. Let's say one of the things that I tell my clients to do all the time is to reach out to people, and I'll use the phrase like, hey Michelle, I just wanted to let you know I really admire the way that you're able to navigate conversations around relationships, boundaries, and I'll have them send messages like that because first off, that has them like identify things that they respect about people that they have relationships with in their life.
Mm,
And then it allows them a space to reflect on, man, maybe I should pay attention to what they're doing here because I really want to create that in my life.
yeah. Yeah. 100%. I think that's such a great activity. And again, I mean, it might feel really vulnerable to do that, to be like complimenting someone else. What are they going to think? Or, whatever that is. But sit with that then. Sit with that. Why does it feel awkward to say something good about someone? Because
Yeah.
because then we have to look at okay, am I having trouble saying good about my things about myself too?
Yeah.
Am I having trouble receiving compliments? Because that's a, glow in the dark identifier here of trouble receiving. If we're having trouble giving compliments, we probably also have trouble receiving them.
Mm.
So then we go there. And the work continues and we must stay fierce.
Yeah. 100%. Oh my goodness. So I love this because we had an idea, a structure, and we just kind of go where the wind takes us as long as we hit our points, right? And
Yep.
I think that's sometimes like I'm not wearing the shirt today, but another thing is also dropping the expectations of
So
having to be so rigid and having to have that boundary be accepted 24/7. Like there are going to be times when people cross your boundary and there are going to be times when you cross people's boundaries.
mm-hmm.
And the the only other thing I think about in this conversation is boundaries boundaries aren't for other people.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times we get caught up in setting boundaries for other people, but they're actually for you. They're for me. They're for Dr. Fynan to set for ourselves and to, I think it just gives us an opportunity to express our own power in our situation
Mm.
when we set them for ourselves.
I love that. I love that because we do get in that headspace of, I'm setting this, and if you cross this, you're a bad person because this is my boundary. But like you said, we probably cross people's boundaries all the time and they may not say it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
but the more we're able to respect our boundaries, the more aware we become of what other people's boundaries may be. And I think if this sounds daunting, because it might for some people, because we live in a space of I'm not used to this, and it sounds like a lot what you're suggesting. So I would encourage just like having this to be a fun self exploration. Like we talk about this stuff, and like you said, we go in with a plan and we're going to have all these bullet points. And but if we looked at it like that, we wouldn't have fun with it. We wouldn't want to have the conversation. We have these conversations because we know, I think we know each other's boundaries, really. Like we know I trust you that we're going to have a fun conversation. You trust me that we're going to have fun and we're still going to hit all the points, and it's going to be good because of that. So I think if
And
we,
we test out metaphors all the time.
right?
Yeah.
So I think that's my my go-to is to make it fun so that you do it. So that you do it because it's important.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. Make it something that you want to do.
Right.
So, I don't know how to apply this, but this is what's coming up for me. And sorry if you hear me pounding on the table in this recording, but that's what I mean. Maybe that's how you start, and it becomes easier to set boundaries. You
Yeah.
think of you think of people that you enjoy spending time with and you have fun with, and you set boundaries. You start there. You
Mm-hmm.
set boundaries in those relationships,
Yeah.
and you see that, hey, when I set boundaries, maybe having boundaries allows more space for more fun.
Right.
um like in the loneliness solution, one of the greatest things that's happened so far is when they talk to each other on a weekly basis, and they said, I have a group of 3, and they said, I really enjoyed how this person set boundaries in our conversation.
Mm.
And they said, hey, this is how much time I've got. So we have X number of minutes left. And what came across was, oh, what is really important for me to share here in the
Yeah.
time that I have? So boundaries are so powerful, but if we can approach it and figure out a fun way, I think we'll be more open to um, finding out what they are.
I love that. And you hit on a big one because by saying, hey, it's essentially saying, I respect your time and I respect my time. So let's make the most of this. As of course, as a relationship coach, dating comes into mind where, I talk to so many people who are like, dating sucks. And I'm like, no, no, dating
Your
is
idea of
fun.
it sucks.
Yeah, dating can be fun. And if we look at it as if we respect boundaries within dating, like, hey, I respect you, I respect me. Like, let's talk and let's have fun together and see if this is something. It doesn't have to be ghosting. That's poor boundaries. It doesn't have to be, performing. That's
Yeah.
poor boundaries. So, yeah, it's how do we respect our time that we're putting into and our mission, you know,
Mm.
with what we're looking for. So we also have to be clear on what we're looking for. And if someone is deviating from that, don't waste their time. Don't waste your time.
Yeah. And it's like no skin off anybody's back.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Nothing.
Oh, yeah, man. I know we could talk forever. Because
Yes. Yes.
it made me think of the Stefan Speaks quote that I put up this week, where he's talking about how often we go chasing after people. And we're just like, always, we're running. And in reality, we should be looking for something that's more like we're coming together. But I
Mm.
think we've been sold a story about the chase and being
Mm.
hunting
So
for.
much to say here. So much to say. Okay, so real quick, just on that, we we chase the external if we are not confident in our ability to find that within ourselves.
Whew,
So going back to the living at home thing, if we are living in a space where we're never taught how to take care of ourselves, we will chase other people out of a need to survive because we don't believe then that we can survive without someone else. They then become the air that you need to breathe. They can feel that pressure and they feel that they are needed instead of wanted. That's not desire and
whew.
that's not sexy, you know? That's not an attraction, that's a repulsion. So if we're trying to magnetize someone to us, we have to set a boundary and be able to maintain our yard. You want your yard to look good. You know how to water the lawn. And if you can't water the lawn yourself, you get an app and you have it set and you hire someone to do it, but you take care of yourself. You take care of your yard.
Whew.
Then someone wants to come to the backyard barbecue. You know what I mean? I don't know. That's just where my head
Okay,
is.
I love that. So, in our remaining time here, is there anything that you want to touch on before we close out?
Mm. I think that another thing that we could look at is the idea that sometimes we're good at setting boundaries in some areas of our lives and in some areas we're not. So it doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. And a lot of times when we are looking at, well, how do I improve in this area? We need to look at the tools that we already have that are working for us. So maybe you're great at setting boundaries at work. Maybe you you work the amount of time that you said you're going to work. You're not feeling like you have to do it all yourself. Maybe you're good at delegating, whatever that might be. How can you apply that to a relationship that you want to have, a romantic relationship where you don't have to take it all on, you know? Or maybe
Yeah.
vice versa. So look at where things are going well. And if they're not going well, that's okay too. Maybe they're a little bit better, you know? But being open to examine, I think, is really important. And treating it like an experiment so that it's fun, you know? We're just examining. We don't have to solve all of these problems. It's not a problem. It's like how do we shift it so that it's better?
Mm, yeah, and I think, yeah, if you can look at it and you using yourself as the example and saying, what do I do really well? Again, for me, it's easy to go to the gym as an example because there's like external outcome results that are visible by doing that. But it's like, okay, so when I break that down, what really was consistent and what made that part of my life successful, where the results I wanted to show up, and apply that to whatever that other area is in your life where it's not exactly where you want it to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so, okay, if people have enjoyed this conversation, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me. I would point you in the direction of my Instagram. It's Dr. Fynan. And that's also my name on Clubhouse, where I've got my Shift Talkers Club there, and we have conversations around making these types of shifts in our lives. And my website is also www.drfynan.com. And I do 15-minute free consultations with people just to see if we may be a good fit to work together in making the shifts that you want to have in your life. And I really feel like that's my purpose here on this planet, is to help people make the shifts that they see are so necessary in order to get the love that they want and deserve, really. So
Well, I mean, it's been a beautiful conversation. And um, if you've enjoyed this conversation, like I said in the beginning, we're testing out brand new platform and delivery. And if you enjoyed this, please let us know, because if you did, we want to continue to show up and serve in the ways that we can. Let me know by messaging me on Instagram. So that's at the real Nathan Todd, or you can find me on Facebook at the Loneliness Coach. And just drop a line. Let us know what was the best part about our conversation here. And if you tried and you reflected on the questions, what did you learn about yourself? We would love to hear about that. And with that, we'll go ahead and close out this very first conversation.
awesome. Always a pleasure, Nathan. Looking forward to many more.